Shy waitress greeted Mafia boss's Sicilian dad. Her Sicilian dialect greeting had every guest frozen. The restaurant breathed before it died. That was how Sophia Rossi thought of it. Iliglio didn't go quiet all at once. It exhaled first, a slow collective release, like a room full of lungs deciding at the same moment to stop drawing air. The clink of crystal dulled. The murmur of conversations dropped, one by one, like candles being pinched out. Even the music, a low, warm tenor playing something Italian through speakers hidden in the ceiling, seemed to shrink, to pull itself back from the edges of the room as though it too understood what was coming. Don Salvatoreé Moretti had arrived. Sophia noticed it the way she noticed everything at Il Giglio, from the periphery, from the edges, from the careful, invisible place she had built for herself over 2 years of silent, deliberate work. She was at Station 4 near the kitchen pass, restocking napkins. She didn't need to restock. Her hands moved on their own. Fold, set, while her eyes tracked the movement near the entrance without turning her head. He came through the door the way old power always does. Not loudly, not with force. He simply appeared, and the room adjusted itself around him like water around a stone. He was tall, or had been once. Age had curved his spine inward, pulled him down from the height he must have carried in his youth. But the width of his shoulders still spoke of a man who had once filled every doorway he walked through. His suit was dark, impeccable, not a single thread out of place. White hair cropped tight against his skull. A face that was all bone and weathered skin. Sharp cheekbones, a nose that had been broken at least once and maybe more. Deep lines carved around his mouth that made him look perpetually displeased with the world, which Sophia supposed he probably was. His left hand hung at his side, and even from across the room she could see the scar. Thick, pink, old, running across the knuckles and down to the base of his thumb. 2 gold rings on his right hand caught the low amber light of the restaurant as he moved. They clicked together, faintly, as his fingers tapped against his thigh. Behind him, 1 step back and to the left, came Dante. Sophia's hands paused, just for a fraction of a second. A stutter in the fold, set, fold, and then she resumed. She couldn't afford to stop. She couldn't afford to do anything that might draw attention to herself. Not tonight, not with both of them in the same room for the first time in months. Dante Moretti was nothing like his father. Where Salvatore was stooped and ancient and cold, Dante was lean and sharp and alive. He moved the way a wolf moves, not aggressively, but with a constant, quiet awareness of everything around him. He was tall, 6 feet 1 inch, broad across the shoulders but not heavy. His build was built for speed, not strength, and he carried himself like someone who knew exactly how fast he could cross a room if he needed to. Dark hair fell across his forehead, longer than it should have been for a man in his position, and he didn't bother to fix it. Everything he wore was black. His jaw was set in that flat. An unreadable line Sophia had watched 100 times from across this room, and the scar on his left side, thin, old, running from just below his ear to the corner of his mouth, caught the light as he turned his head to scan the mezzanine. His eyes moved constantly. Exits, faces, threats. The way someone moves through a room when they've spent their entire life learning that any person in it could be the last one they see. Sophia watched him do it. She always watched him do it. That was the job. Mr. Henderson materialized at her elbow like a nervous ghost. He was a small man, perpetually damp with stress sweat, and his eyes were fixed on the mezzanine with the particular terror of a man whose livelihood depended on everything going perfectly for the next 3 hours. "Table 12, he whispered. VIP. Now, move." Sophia nodded. She set down the napkins, smoothed her apron. Black like everything else at Il Giglio, fitted to her small frame in a way that made her look even smaller than she was. She tucked a strand of dark hair back into the knot at the base of her neck. It was always falling out, always slipping free, no matter how tightly she wound it, and walked toward the mezzanine. The stairs were carpeted, soundless. She climbed them with the particular care of someone who had learned long ago to move without being noticed. Her shoes made no sound. Her body took up almost no space. She was 5 feet 3 inches, slight, The kind of woman people looked past in crowds without ever registering that they'd done it. That was the point. That had been the point for 2 years. The mezzanine was set apart from the rest of the restaurant, a raised platform, semi-private, on it with its own small table and 2 chairs that overlooked the dining room below. Salvatore was already seated. He sat the way old men with power sit, not leaning back, not relaxed, but settled, rooted, like a man who had claimed this space and the air around it simply by existing in it. His hands rested on the table, the scarred left one flat against the white linen, the ringed right one curled loosely around a crystal glass that held nothing yet. Dante stood behind him, one hand on the back of the empty chair, looking out over the restaurant below. His eyes were doing their work, cataloging, measuring, filing away. When Sophia reached the top of the stairs, his gaze landed on her, held for exactly 1 second, then moved on. She felt it anyway, the weight of it. 1 second of being seen by someone who saw everything. Good evening, she said. Her voice was quiet. It always was, at Il Giglio. Quiet and even and slightly breathless, the way a shy girl's voice sounds when she's trying not to take up too much air. Can I get something started for you, gentlemen? Salvatore didn't look at her. Not immediately. He was studying the menu, though Sophia knew he had eaten here dozens of times and probably ordered the same thing every visit. His dark eyes moved across the page with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world, which in a sense he did. Then he looked up. The look was brief, dismissive, the way a king glances at a servant, not unkindly but without any real interest. He registered her, small, dark-haired, trembling slightly, eyes on the floor. Forgettable. He looked back at the menu. Then he spoke. It was Sicilian, not the modern. A rounded version that most people in New York would recognize, but the older tongue, the one with edges to it, the one that carried weight, a casual remark, almost throwaway. An insult, really, not directed at her specifically, but at the general category of people like her. Small people, invisible people, people who didn't matter enough to be addressed directly. The words landed in Sophia's chest like a cold stone dropping into still water. She understood every syllable. She had understood every syllable of every Sicilian conversation she had ever overheard in this restaurant, in every bar, in every back room she had ever been near. Enzo had made sure of that. The old dialect, the real one, the one from Corleone, 2 generations dead, was the first language she ever learned. Before English, before anything else. Wait, it was the language of her blood, and it lived in her bones whether she wanted it to or not. And tonight, standing on the mezzanine of Il Giglio with Don Salvatoreé Moretti looking through her like she was made of glass, something in Sophia cracked. It wasn't planned. That was the thing. And it was the thing that would haunt her for weeks afterward. The thing she would replay in her mind at 3 a.m. in the dark, asking herself why. Why? Why did you do that? It wasn't supposed to happen. The plan was 3 more weeks of silence. 3 more weeks of watching, listening, collecting the last threads of evidence she needed to destroy Rocco and end this. 3 more weeks of being invisible. But Salvatore's words were still echoing in the air. Casual, dismissive, meaningless to him. And Sophia's mouth opened, and the words came out before any part of her conscious mind could stop them. 4 words, Old Sicilian, the dialect of Corleone, spoken with a precision and fluency that no one in that room, no one alive possibly, could match. The words were a proverb, ancient, layered with meaning that only someone who understood the old bloodlines would catch. On the surface, they were a simple acknowledgement, a servant's greeting, deferential, appropriate. Underneath, buried in the syntax and the cadence and the particular way certain vowels fell, they carried something else entirely. I see you, and you should see me. The room stopped. It didn't happen gradually. It happened all at once, as though someone had pressed a button and every sound in Il Giglio simply ceased to exist. The sommelier near the bar froze with a bottle halfway to a glass. 2 businessmen at table 6 stopped mid-sentence, their mouths open, their eyes suddenly fixed on the mezzanine. A woman in diamonds at table 9 set down her fork with exaggerated care, as though any sudden movement might shatter something fragile and invisible. Sophia felt it. the weight of every eye in the room shifting upward, the collective intake of breath, the silence so total she could hear the ventilation system humming in the ceiling. Her hands began to shake, not because she was afraid, though she was, underneath everything, in the deep and ancient way that prey is afraid of predators. Her hands shook because she could not stop them. It was the one thing about her body she had never been able to fully control. In moments of pressure, in moments where the performance demanded something her nerves could not quite deliver, her fingers trembled. Now, holding the small leather-bound menu against her thigh, they shook visibly. Anyone watching would have seen it. Everyone was watching. Don Salvatoreé Moretti had gone very still. He hadn't moved. Not a muscle, not a finger, not the slow rhythmic tap of his rings against the table. He was looking at Sophia with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not surprise exactly. Something colder than both. Something that looked like recognition. His dark eyes, bright, ancient, missing absolutely nothing, held hers for a long, terrible beat. Sophia kept her gaze down. She kept her shoulders curved inward, her body small, her face a mask of quiet terror. A shy girl who had just made a horrible mistake. See, that was what they needed to see. That was what she needed them to believe. Behind Salvatoreé, Dante had not moved either. He stood exactly where he had been standing, one hand on the back of the chair, body angled toward the room below. But something had changed in the way he held himself. The constant scanning had stopped. His dark brown eyes were fixed on Sophia, and they were not moving, not cataloging, not measuring, just looking, seeing. 3 seconds passed. 4. The silence stretched like a wire pulled taut. Then Salvatore lifted his right hand, slowly, deliberately, and picked up his crystal glass. He took a sip of water. Set it down. The rings clicked together, once, in the quiet. He nodded, a single small movement of his head. Not approval exactly, acknowledgement. Like a man who had just been shown something unexpected and was deciding in real time what to do about it. Sophia bowed her head. "Scusa, signore," she whispered. Her voice shook, perfectly. "I am sorry, I didn't mean—" "Leave us," Salvatore said, in English. Quiet, final. She left. Down the stairs across the mezzanine, back into the body of the restaurant where the silence was just beginning to crack and reform itself into something approaching normal. She didn't run. She walked, carefully, quietly, the way she always walked, and she didn't look back. But she felt Dante's eyes on her the entire way down. She made it to the kitchen. Through the double doors, past the line cooks who were pretending very hard not to notice anything, past the prep station, past the walk-in cooler. Where she pushed through the back door into the narrow service corridor that led to the staff bathrooms and the loading dock, and beyond that, the alley. She stopped, pressed her back against the cold concrete wall, closed her eyes. Her hands were still shaking. Sophia held them in front of her and watched them tremble. Small, calloused, scarred on the inside of the left wrist with a white line she had carried since she was 9 years old. And she breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The way Enzo taught her years ago when the fear got too big and the hiding got too hard. It worked, slowly. The trembling faded. Her heartbeat dropped from a sprint to something approaching a walk. She opened her eyes. The corridor was empty. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, cold and indifferent. Somewhere beyond the kitchen, Urdigliglio was resuming its evening. The murmur rebuilding, the crystal clinking again, the music returning to fill the space where the silence had been. Sophia stood there for another 30 seconds. Then she pulled out her phone, opened it, and typed a single message to the only number saved without a name. It happened. The reply came back in 12 seconds. "Where are you?" she typed. "Back alley, Il Giglio." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Stay there. Do not move. I'm coming." Sophia locked the phone, slid it back into the pocket of her apron, looked down the corridor toward the loading dock and the alley beyond it, where the September air would be cool and damp and dark, and where, in approximately 4 minutes, a stocky man with a limp and a beard and gentle brown eyes would appear and ask her exactly one question. How bad?" She already knew the answer. Bad. It was bad. Because in the space of 4 words, 4 ancient, stupid, unstoppable words, she had done the one thing she had spent 2 years making sure she would never do. She had let them see her. Enzo arrived in 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Sophia knew because she counted. It was something she did when the waiting got too long. Counted seconds, measured time, broke the silence into small, manageable pieces she could hold in her fist and squeeze until they passed. By the time she heard the footsteps, uneven, the right leg dragging just slightly on the wet concrete, the way it always did when he moved fast, she had counted to 251. He came around the corner of the loading dock with his hands in the pockets of a dark jacket and his beard catching the light from the single bulb above the service door. His face was doing the thing it did when he was trying not to look worried, which was to look worried harder, in a way that fooled no one who knew him. His warm brown eyes found her immediately, scanned her, top to bottom, checking for damage the way a man checks a thing he has spent his whole life protecting. "You're not hurt," he said. "Not a question?" "No." "Good." He stopped in front of her, closer than most people would stand, close enough that she could smell the cigarette smoke on his jacket and the coffee underneath it. He studied her face for another moment, reading something there that she wasn't sure she was showing on purpose. Then, "How bad?" Sophia told him. All of it. The insult, the response, the silence, the way Salvatore had looked at her. Not through her, not past her, at her, the way Dante had not looked away. Enzo listened without interrupting. His thick, scarred hands stayed in his pockets. His jaw worked slowly, the way it did when he was chewing on something that tasted bad. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Salvatore will want to know who you are," he said finally. "He will ask Dante to find out. Dante will look, and when he looks, he will find nothing. Because there is nothing to find. You have been careful. 2 years, and you have been careful. But," Enzo's eyes shifted, just slightly. A flicker toward the alley mouth, toward the street beyond it, toward the city that surrounded them on all sides like dark water. "But Rocco will also have heard, Marshall," he said. "And Rocco is not interested in who you are. Rocco is interested in what you know." The name sat between them like something physical, cold, dense. Rocco, the conciliary. The man who sat at Salvatore's right hand at every dinner, every meeting, every gathering of the family's inner circle. The man with the round, soft, pleasant face and the small, quick eyes and the hands that never stopped moving. The man who, 3 years ago, had picked up a phone in the wine cellar of this very restaurant and arranged the death of Marco Moretti, Dante's older brother, in a conversation that lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Sophia knew the exact length because she had been standing 6 feet away, hidden behind a rack of Barolo, with her phone recording every word. "Well, he doesn't know what I have," she said. "No, not yet." Enzo shifted his weight off his bad leg. A small, unconscious movement he would have denied if she'd pointed it out. "But he knows something changed tonight. He was in the room, Sophia. He saw your face when you spoke. And Rocco is not a stupid man." "I know what Rocco is." "Then you know we need to move the timeline up." Sophia nodded. She had already been thinking it. The calculation running in the back of her mind the way it always did, cold and precise. 3 more weeks had been the plan. 3 more weeks to collect the final piece of evidence. A second recording she needed, one that would connect the wire transfers to Rocco directly, irrefutably, in a way that no lawyer in the world could argue around. Without it, what she had was circumstantial. Damning, yes, but not enough. And not for what she needed it to do. "I can get it in 10 days, she said. "Maybe less." Enzo looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Pride, maybe. Or something older and sadder than pride. He had raised this girl, had carried her out of Sicily in the dark when she was 9 years old, had taught her language and silence and survival, had spent 20 years making sure no one in the world knew she existed. And here she was, 5 feet tall and slight as a reed, standing in a damp alley behind a Manhattan restaurant, talking about timelines and evidence like she was planning a business deal. 10 days, and he repeated, "All right, but you do not go back inside that building. Not until this is done." "I have to." If I disappear from the staff roster, Henderson will. Henderson is irrelevant. Is Sophia. He said her name the way he always did when he needed her to listen. Firm, but with something underneath it. Something that reminded her she was not just an operative. She was his. If Rocco decides you are a threat before you have what you need, none of it matters. You understand? She understood. She nodded again, and this time Enzo reached out and put his hand on her shoulder. A heavy, warm weight, the scarred fingers pressing gently through the fabric of her apron, and held it there for a moment. Go home, he said. I will handle Henderson, and I will talk to my contact about moving the wire transfer records up. Sophia pulled away gently, untied her apron, folded it into a small, precise square, and handed it to him without a word. He took it, tucked it under his arm. She turned to go, then stopped. Here, Enzo. Yes? Dante saw me. When I spoke, he was looking at me the whole time. Enzo was quiet for a beat. 2. Yes, he said. I imagine he was. Something in the way he said it, careful, measured, almost deliberately neutral, made Sophia look at him, but his face gave nothing away. He just nodded once, and she turned and walked out of the alley into the street, where the city swallowed her immediately, the way it always did, the way she had always needed it to. She did not see Dante Moretti standing at the mouth of the alley, 40 feet behind her, watching her go. 3 days passed. Sophia did not go back to Il Giglio. She called Henderson the next morning and told him she had a family emergency. Vague enough to be believable, specific enough to buy time. Henderson, who was perpetually stressed and perpetually short-staffed, grumbled but accepted it. She would be back in a week, she told him. Maybe less. She spent the 3 days in her apartment in Queens, a small, sparse room above a laundromat on a street that smelled permanently of detergent and exhaust. The room contained a bed, a table, a chair, a shelf of books, and a single photograph of Enzo from years ago. Younger, smiling, standing in front of a building she had never been able to identify. The walls were bare. The window looked out onto the street below, where the traffic moved in a slow, endless loop. Sophia spent most of her time at the table, going through her files. The evidence was stored in 3 places: a USB drive in a hollowed-out book on her shelf, a cloud backup accessible only through a series of encrypted passwords she had memorized years ago, and the originals, which lived in a lockbox at a storage unit in Brooklyn that only Enzo knew the address of. She reviewed everything. The ledger, a physical notebook, stolen from Rocco's office 8 months ago during a shift she had engineered with painful care. Page by page, photographed and returned before anyone noticed it was gone. The wire transfers, digital records routed through 3 shell companies that showed the money moving from a Moretti family account to an outside contractor the same week Marco died. And the audio recording, 4 minutes and 17 seconds of Rocco's voice, calm and businesslike, arranging everything. It was almost enough. Almost. What she still needed was the link between Rocco and the shell companies. A document, an email, something that put his name on the other end of the wire. Without it, a good enough lawyer could argue the transfers were authorized by someone else in the family, could argue Rocco was never involved, could keep him breathing and free and dangerous. Sophia needed that document, and she knew exactly where it was. In Rocco's private study, in a building on the Upper East Side that she had mapped over the course of 6 months. Entry point by entry point, guard rotation by guard rotation. 10 days. She could do it in 10 days. On the 4th morning, she went to the coffee shop on the corner, a small, warm place with mismatched chairs and coffee that was slightly too strong, and sat by the window with a book she wasn't reading. That was when she saw him. Dante Moretti was sitting at the counter, not looking at her. That was the first thing she noticed. And it was wrong somehow, in a way she couldn't immediately identify. He was looking at his phone, scrolling with one thumb, his other hand wrapped around a cup of coffee. Black jacket, dark hair falling across his forehead, the scar on his jaw catching the pale morning light. He looked for all the world like any other man in Brooklyn having coffee on a Tuesday. But he was not any other man. And this was not any other coffee shop. This was the coffee shop Sophia had been coming to for 3 weeks, at the same time every morning, because it was close and quiet, and she had let her guard down enough to make it routine. She had not told anyone about it. Not Enzo. Not anyone. Dante had found it on his own. Sophia did not react. She kept her eyes on her book, turned a page she had not read, breathed slowly, evenly, the way Enzo had taught her. When her hands did not shake, not this time. This time the fear was buried deep enough that her body couldn't reach it. She stayed for 20 minutes, finished her coffee, closed her book, stood up, put on her jacket, and walked toward the door. She passed within 3 feet of Dante on her way out. Close enough to smell him, something clean and sharp underneath the coffee, something expensive that she couldn't name. Close enough to see the way his jaw tightened, just slightly, as she moved past, a muscle working under the skin. He did not look up from his phone. Sophia walked out into the morning air and did not look back. But something had shifted inside her chest, something small and inconvenient and warm. And she spent the entire walk home trying to decide what it was. She already knew. She just didn't want to say it. On the 5th day, Rocco came to see her, not at her apartment. He didn't know about that, not yet. He came to Il Giglio during the lunch prep, when the kitchen was loud and crowded and no one paid attention to anything that wasn't directly in front of them. Sophia was there despite Enzo's instructions. She had come back that morning, told Henderson the family emergency was resolved, and slipped back into her routine like water filling a glass. She needed to be inside the building. She needed to be near Rocco, to watch him, to read the way he moved now that the dialect incident had happened. She was restocking wine glasses near the bar when she felt him. It wasn't a sound or a movement. It was a presence, a shift in the air, a subtle change in the way the room oriented itself. Rocco walked through Il Giglio the way a man walks through his own house, unhurried, unbothered, completely at ease. He was wearing a gray suit today, immaculate, his brown hair slicked back in that permanently wet way that made him look like he had just stepped out of a rain shower. His small eyes moved quickly across the room, faster than his body, faster than his feet, cataloging everything with a speed that was almost mechanical. They landed on Sophia. She felt them land, felt the weight of them, brief, precise, like a finger tapping a spot on a map. Then they moved on. Rocco continued walking toward the back of the restaurant, toward the private corridor that led to the offices, his hands adjusting his cufflinks as he went. He had seen her. He had registered her. They were in his hands. Those perpetually moving hands had not stopped moving for a single second. Sophia set down the glass she was holding, very carefully, very quietly. She knew what that meant. Rocco's hands moved when he was calm. They moved faster when he was thinking. And they moved fastest, almost frantically, though no one who didn't know him would ever call it that, when he was afraid. Tonight, Sophia thought, watching the corridor where Rocco had disappeared. Tonight his hands were moving fast. He was afraid of something, and Sophia was beginning to suspect it was her. On track. Batch 3 begins now, picking up where Batch 2 ended. Dante closes in. Sophia lets him, just barely. Rocco tightens. The first real moment between Sophia and Dante happens. But danger is right there beside it. Dante found her again on the 6th day. Not at the coffee shop this time. At the bodega 2 blocks from her apartment, a narrow, cramped store that smelled like old wood and canned heat, where the owner knew her by sight and never asked questions. She was buying bread and a jar of honey when she turned from the counter, and he was simply there, standing by the door, looking at a rack of magazines he clearly had no interest in. He was wearing a dark gray sweater today, no jacket. His hands were in his pockets, loose, open, the way she had begun to notice he held them when he was near her. Like he was showing her something, like he was making a point without saying it out loud. Sophia paid for her bread, walked toward the door. He stepped aside to let her pass. Just barely, just enough that the space between them was narrow. She moved through it without looking at him. But she was close enough to feel the warmth coming off him, close enough to catch that clean, sharp smell again, the one she still couldn't name, and something in her chest pulled tight, the way a wire pulls tight when weight is added to it. Outside, the afternoon light was flat and gray. October had arrived without announcement, and the air had turned cold overnight. Sophia walked. Dante fell into step beside her. They walked in silence for 2 blocks. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them looked at the other. It should have been uncomfortable. A man she barely knew, walking beside her on a public street, matching her pace exactly. But it wasn't. It was something else. Something that felt oddly like company. At the corner where Sophia usually turned toward her building, she stopped. Dante stopped too, stood beside her, a hand still in his pockets, looking down the street the way someone looks at a view they're trying to memorize. "You keep showing up," Sophia said. Quiet, not accusatory, just stating a fact. "Yes. Why?" He was quiet for a moment. His jaw worked. That subtle movement she had noticed before, the one that happened when he was choosing his words carefully. Then he turned his head and looked at her. Not a glance. A look. The kind that held. "Because you're the only person in my life who doesn't want something from me," he said. The words landed somewhere beneath her ribs. Sophia held his gaze for a beat. 2. And then looked away. Down the street, at the cars and the pedestrians, and the ordinary machinery of a city that didn't care about any of this. "Everyone wants something," she said. "Not you. At least, not from me." She almost told him then. The words were right there, rising up from somewhere deep, the way water rises when pressure builds beneath it. She swallowed them back down, turned the corner, walked toward her building without looking back. He didn't follow, but when she glanced down from her window 10 minutes later, he was gone from the street, and the absence of him felt heavier than his presence had. That night she dreamed about Sicily. She dreamed about it rarely, maybe once a month, sometimes less. Always the same dream, more or less. The house in Corleone, the one she had lived in until she was 9. It was small and white and sat on a hillside that looked out over a valley of olive trees. In the dream, she was always standing in the doorway, looking out at the trees. And the air was warm and dry and smelled like dust and lemons. Behind her, inside the house, someone was speaking. The old dialect, a woman's voice, her mother's voice, though Sophia had not heard it in 19 years and could no longer remember what it actually sounded like. In the dream, it was always there, just behind her, just out of reach. She woke at 4 a.m. with the taste of lemons in her mouth and her hands shaking. She lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the laundromat hum beneath her floor, and thought about Dante Moretti's eyes. They were brown. That was the thing most people wouldn't notice. In low light, they looked almost black, the way her own eyes did, and he used that. He used the darkness the way he used everything, strategically, deliberately, to make himself harder to read. But Sophia had been watching him for 2 years. She knew what his eyes looked like in direct light. She had seen it twice, once in the corridor at Il Giglio, when the fluorescent bulb had caught him full on, and once today, on the corner, when the flat gray afternoon sun had hit his face at just the right angle. Brown, warm brown, the softest thing about him. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes and told herself it didn't matter. It didn't matter what color his eyes were. It didn't matter that his voice was low and steady and made her want to lean in when he spoke. It didn't matter that when he stood next to her, hands open and loose in his pockets, something inside her chest unclenched in a way it had not unclenched in years. None of it mattered. Because in 10 days, 9 now, she was going to hand him the proof that his own family's consigliere had murdered his brother. And when she did, everything between them would end. Not because he would hate her, maybe he would, but more likely because he would understand exactly what she was, what she had been, from the first moment he saw her. And understanding would be worse than hate. Understanding would be the end of whatever this was, this strange, quiet, dangerous thing that was growing between them in the spaces where no one was watching. Sophia lay in the dark and breathed and did not sleep again until morning. On the 7th day, Rocco sent someone to her apartment, not to hurt her, not yet, to watch. Sophia noticed him on her way back from the coffee shop, a man she had never seen before, Sitting on the stoop of the building across the street with a newspaper he wasn't reading. Medium height, unremarkable clothes. The kind of man you would look past in a crowd. Rocco's type. The consigliere surrounded himself with forgettable people, the way some men surround themselves with weapons. Quietly, efficiently, always within reach. She walked past without changing her pace, went inside, climbed the stairs to her room, locked the door, stood at the window and looked down at the street, at the man with the newspaper, and felt the walls closing in from all sides. Rocco knew where she lived. That meant he had found her real name, or at least found her face, connected it to the woman who had spoken in the old dialect at Ililio. It meant the timeline had just collapsed. 9 days was too long. She needed to move. And she needed to move now. She called Enzo. He answered on the second ring, the way he always did. Never the first, never the third, always the second. "They're outside my building," she said. No preamble, no greeting. A beat of silence. Then, "How many?" "One, that I can see." "When did they arrive?" "I don't know. This morning, at least." Another silence. She could hear him breathing, slow, deliberate, the way he breathed when he was thinking hard. Then, "You need to leave that apartment tonight. Take nothing but the USB and your phone. I have a place in Brooklyn, a rooming house on Atlantic. I'll text you the address. The originals are in the storage unit. They stay there. If they take your apartment, they find nothing." Sophia nodded even though he couldn't see her. Her mind was already moving. Packing list, route, timing. How to get out without the man on the stoop noticing. How to disappear cleanly, the way she had been disappearing her whole life. "Enzo, yes. Dante has been following me. For days. He knows where I live too." The silence on the other end was longer this time. When Enzo spoke again, his voice was careful, measured in a way that told her he was choosing every word. "I know," he said. Sophia stared at the phone. "You know? I have been watching him watch you, since the night at Il Giglio." A pause. "He is not a threat, Sophia. Not to you, not the way Rocco is." "How can you?" "Because I have watched Dante Moretti for 3 years. I have watched the way he moves through the world, and I have watched the way he moves when he is near you." Another pause, longer. "He is not hunting you. Puna, he is following you the way a man follows something he does not want to lose sight of." Sophia said nothing. The man with the newspaper was still sitting across the street, turning pages he was not reading. The city moved around him, indifferent. "Leave tonight," Enzo said. "I will handle the rest." He hung up. Sophia set the phone down on the table and stood in her small, sparse room. The bed, the chair, the shelf of books, the single photograph of Enzo, and looked at all of it the way you look at something you are seeing for the last time. Then she began to pack. Sophia left at 11 p.m. She did not turn on the lights. She packed in the dark. The USB drive from the hollowed book, her phone, a change of clothes, the small amount of cash she kept in an envelope taped to the underside of the table. She moved quietly, the way she had been moving her entire life, and she did not look out the window again. The man with the newspaper had been replaced an hour ago by another man, younger, leaning against a parked car, smoking. A shift change. Rocco was serious. She left through the back of the building, down a narrow staircase that smelled like bleach and old pipes, out through a door that opened onto a side street she had mapped in her first week in the apartment. Turned left. Walked 2 blocks without looking back. Then descended into the subway and rode the 4 train to Brooklyn, where the city was quieter and the streets were darker, and no one paid attention to a small woman with a bag over her shoulder moving through the night. The rooming house on Atlantic Avenue was exactly what Enzo had promised. Small, old, forgettable. A narrow brownstone wedged between a dry cleaner and a nail salon, with a single buzzer at the door, in a hallway that smelled like cooking oil and floor wax. The landlady was a heavy-set woman in her 60s, who took cash, asked no questions, and handed Sophia a key without looking up from her television. The room was on the 3rd floor, small, a single bed with a thin mattress, a window that looked out onto an air shaft, a radiator that clanked and hissed like something alive. No television, no decoration, a bare bulb on a pull chain. Sophia set her bag on the bed, sat down beside it, looked at the walls. She had been in rooms like this before, dozens of them over the years. Enzo had moved them constantly when she was a child. New city every few months, new name, new school, new life built from scratch each time. She had learned to stop making each place feel like home. Home was dangerous. Home was something you got attached to, and attachment was something people could use against you. But sitting there in the dark and the quiet, with the radiator hissing and the city muffled outside, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Alone. Not the useful kind of alone. The kind that kept her safe, that kept her invisible, that had kept her alive for 19 years. The other kind. The kind that sat in the chest like a stone and pressed down on everything. She thought about Dante's voice, the way he said her name. Not quickly, not casually, but slowly, like he was turning it over in his mouth, feeling the shape of it. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and breathed. She did not sleep that night. Not really. Or she dozed in and out, shallow, restless, the way animals sleep when they know something is close. Every sound in the building woke her. Footsteps in the hallway, the landlady's television bleeding through the walls, a car alarm on the street below. At 6 a.m., she got up, washed her face in the tiny bathroom down the hall, and went out for coffee. The morning was cold. A thin mist hung over Atlantic Avenue, turning the street lights into soft amber smudges. Sophia walked 3 blocks to a coffee shop she had never been to before. No routine, no patterns, the way Enzo had taught her. She ordered black coffee and sat by the window and watched the street. Dante appeared at 7:15. He was across the street on the other side of Atlantic, leaning against the wall of a bodega with his hands in his jacket pockets. Not looking at her, and not looking at anything in particular, just standing there the way he always stood, still, patient, like a man who had all the time in the world and was comfortable with silence. Sophia watched him for a full minute before she moved. Then she stood, left her coffee on the table, and walked out. She crossed the street, walked directly up to him, stopped 2 feet away. He looked at her, no surprise, no pretense, just those dark brown eyes, warm in the direct morning light, holding hers with a steadiness that made something in her chest ache. "You followed me here," she said. "Yes. How did you find me?" A small pause. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that. "I told you, I have been watching you for 8 months. That was Queens. This is Brooklyn. You left Queens last night." "And I followed." Sophia stared at him. The mist was thinning around them, the morning light strengthening, and the street was waking up. Delivery trucks, early commuters, a woman walking a dog. Normal life, moving around them like water around 2 stones. "Do you know why I left?" she asked. Dante's expression shifted. The almost smile disappeared. Something harder moved behind his eyes. Not anger. Recognition. The look of a man who already knew the answer and didn't like it. "Rocco," he said. The name in his mouth sounded different than it did in anyone else's. Flatter, colder, like a door closing. Sophia didn't confirm or deny it. She held his gaze for another long beat, long enough to let him see that she wasn't going to lie to him. Not about this. Not anymore. Then she turned and walked back toward the rooming house. And this time, when she heard his footsteps fall into step behind her, she did not tell him to stop. He came inside. She didn't invite him exactly. She just stopped at the door, turned, and looked at him. And he read whatever was in her face, because he nodded once and followed her up the narrow stairs without a word. The landlady glanced up from her television as they passed, looked at Dante, tall, broad, dark, the kind of man who filled a hallway, and looked back at the screen without comment. The room was exactly as Sophia had left it. The thin bed, the bare bulb, the radiator hissing in the corner. She watched Dante take it in, watched his eyes move across the space the way they always moved, cataloging, reading. She saw the moment he understood what it meant. A woman who had been living like this, moving from room to room, leaving everything behind, over and over. He didn't say anything about it. He just set his jaw, that subtle tightening she had learned to recognize, and turned back to her. "Tell me," he said, quiet, not a demand. something closer to a request. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were in her lap, folded, still, not shaking. She was past shaking now. She was past a lot of things. She told him. Not everything. Not the full picture. Not yet. But enough. That someone inside his family was watching her. That she had information they wanted to keep buried. That she had been at Il Giglio for 2 years, not as a waitress, but as something else. Something she could not fully explain. Not tonight. Dante listened the way he always listened. Completely still, his eyes on her face, his hands loose at his sides. When she finished, the room was quiet except for the radiator and the muffled sounds of the street below. He sat down beside her on the bed. Not close, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the solid presence of him, like a wall between her and everything outside this room. "You are not safe," when he said. "I know. And you won't tell me why. Not yet. Not yet." "No," he nodded, looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked at her again. And this time the expression on his face was something she had not seen before. Not suspicion, not curiosity, something more open than both. Something that looked almost like trust. "All right," he said. "Then I stay." Sophia turned her head to look at him. They were close, closer than she had realized. Close enough that she could see the scar on his jaw in detail. The way the skin had healed unevenly, puckered slightly at one end. Close enough to see the exact shade of brown in his eyes. Close enough that if she leaned forward, just slightly, just an inch, she would be touching him. She didn't lean forward, but she didn't move away either. They sat there side by side on the narrow bed, the radiator hissing and the city humming beyond the walls, and the silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything neither of them was saying, everything both of them were feeling, everything that existed in the space between two people who were running out of room to pretend. Dante's hand moved, just slightly. His fingers brushed against hers on the mattress between them, barely, the lightest possible contact, like he was testing whether she would pull away. She didn't. His fingers stayed, resting against hers, not holding, just there. Sophia looked at their hands, his large, hers small, his skin pale against her olive warmth, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Something she had kept locked for a very long time. Something that hurt, coming open. Something that felt, underneath the hurt, like breathing. Outside on the street below, a black car slowed as it passed the brownstone. Neither of them saw it. Dante did not leave. Sophia didn't ask him to. She told herself it was practical. A man like him, in the building, was a deterrent. Rocco's people were less likely to move on her if they knew a Moretti was close. It was strategy. It was calculation. It was the same cold arithmetic she'd been running for 2 years. It wasn't, and she knew it wasn't, but she let herself believe it. Oh, because the alternative, that she wanted him there, that his presence beside her on that narrow bed made the walls feel less close and the dark feel less heavy, was something she couldn't afford to examine too closely. Not yet, not with everything closing in. They didn't sleep. Not really. Sophia sat with her back against the wall, her knees drawn up, watching the air shaft outside the window lighten by degrees as the night moved toward morning. Dante sat beside her, one shoulder against hers, his eyes half closed but not closed all the way. He was listening. She could tell by the way his body held itself. Loose but alert, the way a man holds himself when he's ready to move at a moment's notice. At some point, 3 a.m., maybe 4, Sophia's head began to drop. She caught herself twice, jerking back upright, her eyes snapping open. The third time she didn't catch herself. Her head tilted sideways, slowly, and came to rest against Dante's shoulder. She felt him go still beneath her, felt the slight intake of breath. Just one, barely there. Then he relaxed again, and after a moment, very carefully, he shifted his weight so that his shoulder was more solid beneath her, more steady, like he was adjusting himself to hold something he didn't want to drop. Sophia slept. For the first time in days, she slept without dreaming. Morning came gray and cold through the air shaft window. Sophia woke to the sound of the radiator and the smell of coffee, not from inside the room, but from somewhere below, seeping up through the floorboards. She blinked. Her neck ached from the angle she had slept at. Her body felt stiff, heavy, with the way it always did after a night without real rest. Dante was no longer beside her. She sat up. The room was empty. Just the bed, the bare bulb, the thin morning light. His jacket was gone. For one cold second she thought he had left, and the feeling that moved through her was sharper than it should have been, sharper than strategy or calculation could explain. Then she heard his voice, below her, in the hallway, talking to someone, low, unhurried, almost friendly. She stood, went to the door, opened it. Dante was on the landing below, leaning against the banister with a paper cup of coffee in each hand. The landlady was beside him, looking up at him with an expression Sophia had never seen on her face before. Something close to amusement. Dante said something quiet. Sophia didn't catch the words, and the landlady laughed. Actually laughed. Then she shuffled back toward her apartment, shaking her head. Dante looked up, saw Sophia in the doorway, held up the second cup of coffee. She came down the stairs and took it from him. Their fingers touched on the cup. Brief, warm, unavoidable. She wrapped both hands around it and let the heat seep into her palms. "You charmed my landlady," she said. "She told me about her grandchildren. There are 4. The youngest is named after a saint I have never heard of." Sophia almost smiled. Almost. The almost was enough. Dante saw it, and something in his face softened in a way that made her chest do that thing again. That painful unclenching, like a fist she had been holding for years, was slowly, slowly opening. They went back upstairs, sat on the bed again, the same way they had sat the night before, side by side. Shoulders close but not quite touching. Sophia drank her coffee. Dante drank his. The radiator hissed. The city moved outside. "I need to tell you something," Sophia said. Dante turned his head, looked at her, waited. She opened her mouth. The words were there. All of them, everything. The full weight of 2 years pressing against the back of her teeth. Marco, Rocco, the evidence. Who she really was. What the Moretti family had done to her family, and what she was going to do to them in return. She looked at him, at the scar on his jaw, at the dark brown eyes that were watching her with that same open, unguarded expression. The one that said, "I'm not going anywhere." And she couldn't. Not yet. Not this morning, in this room. With the coffee still warm in her hands and the way he was looking at her, like she was the only real thing in the world. If she told him now, this would end. Whatever this was, this quiet, dangerous, impossible thing growing between them, it would end the moment he understood what she had been doing, what she had been planning, how long she had been watching him. "I'm not who you think I am," she said instead. The same words she had used before, smaller than the truth, but true enough. Dante studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, like he already knew she wasn't ready, and he was willing to wait. "I know," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." The guilt hit her like a physical blow. She felt it in her stomach, hot, sharp, spreading outward through her chest. She looked down at her coffee and breathed through it and did not let it show on her face. But Dante saw something. She knew he did, because his hand moved, the same way it had moved the night before. His fingers found hers on the mattress between them, rested against them, not holding, just there. This time Sophia turned her hand over, let her fingers curl around his. It was a small thing, barely anything, but in the silence of that room, with the radiator hissing and the city muffled beyond the walls, it felt enormous. It felt like stepping off a ledge. Dante looked down at their hands, then up at her, and the expression on his face, quiet, almost reverent, like he was holding something fragile and knew it, made Sophia's breath catch in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She leaned in, just slightly, just enough to close the distance between them by half. Dante met her the rest of the way. The kiss was nothing like she had imagined it would be, and she had imagined it in the dark hours of the night more than she wanted to admit. It was not desperate, not hungry. It was slow, Careful. His free hand came up to the side of her face, large, warm, steady, and held her there, his thumb resting against her cheekbone. And the way he kissed her was like he was learning something, like he was memorizing the shape of her mouth, the taste of coffee on her lips, the small sound she made when his thumb moved against her skin. Sophia's eyes closed. Her hand tightened around his. She leaned into him, into the warmth of him, the solidness, the quiet certainty of him. And for 30 seconds, the world outside did not exist. Rocco did not exist. And the evidence, the timeline, the danger warrant, none of it existed. There was only this, only him. Only the way his mouth felt against hers and the way his hand held her face, like she was something worth being careful with. Then her phone rang. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. Sophia pulled back. Sharp, sudden, her body reacting before her mind caught up. She fumbled for the phone in her pocket, looked at the screen. Enzo, she answered. Put it to her ear. Dante watched her, his hand still on the bed where hers had been, his face unreadable. Sophia. Enzo's voice was wrong, tight, breathless in a way she had never heard from him. Listen to me. Do not react. Do not let whoever is with you see your face. Her blood went cold. Rocco knows about the recording, Enzo said. He knows you have it. Wes, he knows where you are. Atlantic Avenue, the rooming house. His men are moving now. You have maybe 20 minutes. Sophia breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Her face stayed still. Her hands did not shake. Okay, she said, quiet, calm, like she was confirming a dinner reservation. Get out, now. Take the USB, leave everything else. I will meet you at the location we discussed. You know which one. Okay. And Sophia, a pause. She heard him breathe, heard something underneath the breath that sounded, for the first time in her memory, like fear. Be careful. Rocco is not playing anymore. The line went dead. Sophia lowered the phone, looked at Dante. He was watching her face, reading it, the way he read everything, seeing past the calm surface to whatever was moving underneath. What happened? He asked. Sophia stood up, moved to the bed, picked up her bag, the USB already inside, her phone, the cash. Sipped it closed, turned back to him. We need to leave, she said, right now. Dante didn't ask why. He didn't hesitate. He stood, picked up his jacket, and moved to the door. Which way? He asked. Sophia looked at him, at the man she had just kissed, at the man whose brother she was about to avenge, at the man who was standing in front of a door without knowing what was on the other side of it and asking her which direction to go. And something in her chest broke open, just a little wider, just a little more. Down, she said. Back stairs, now. They moved. The back stairs were narrow and dark and smelled like decades of damp concrete. Sophia moved fast. Faster than she had moved in months. Her small body built for exactly this, under for tight spaces and quick turns, and disappearing into cracks that larger people couldn't fit through. Dante was behind her, one hand on the railing, his longer legs eating up the stairs 2 at a time. He was quiet, no wasted movement, no questions. Just following her lead the way someone follows a guide through unfamiliar territory, completely without hesitation. They reached the ground floor. A door at the bottom of the stairwell led out onto a side street. Narrow, one way, running parallel to Atlantic Avenue. Sophia pushed it open 1 inch, looked out. A black car on the corner, engine running. 2 men inside, visible only as shadows behind tinted glass. She pulled the door shut, turned to Dante, held up one finger. Wait, and pressed her ear against the door. Nothing. No footsteps on the other side. When no voices in the hallway behind them. The landlady's television, faint and tinny, bleeding through a wall somewhere above. Sophia pulled out her phone, opened the map, studied it for 5 seconds. The streets, the subway entrances, the routes that led away from Atlantic Avenue and into the maze of side streets that ran through the center of Brooklyn, like veins through a body. She looked at Dante, pointed left, then down, underground. He nodded, once, understood. They went out, The air hit them like a wall, cold, sharp October morning. Sophia walked, not ran. Running drew attention. She kept her pace even, her shoulders slightly curved, her eyes forward. A woman going somewhere ordinary, nothing to see. Dante walked beside her, hands in his pockets, matching her pace exactly. To anyone watching, once they were just two people on a Brooklyn street at 8 a.m. They made it half a block before the car moved. Sophia felt it more than saw it. A shift in the peripheral, a change in the rhythm of the street. The black car pulled away from the corner, slow and deliberate, and began to crawl down Atlantic in the same direction they were walking. Not fast, not aggressive, just following. Patient. The way wolves follow prey they know they can outlast. "Don't look," Sophia said, barely a whisper. Dante didn't look. His jaw tightened. She saw it in her peripheral vision, the muscle working under the skin. But his body stayed loose. His pace stayed even. They turned left at the next intersection. Down a side street that narrowed almost immediately, the buildings pressing in on both sides. A laundry line strung between fire escapes overhead like dark flags. The car couldn't follow here. Too narrow. But Rocco's men weren't stupid. They would know the neighborhood. They would have someone on foot. Sophia moved faster, not running, walking quickly, purposefully, the way someone walks when they know exactly where they're going and have no time to waste. She cut through an alley between two brownstones, across a small courtyard she had mapped months ago during one of her early surveillance runs, and out onto a street that led directly to the subway entrance on Bergen Street. They descended. The platform was crowded. Morning rush, bodies packed together, the air thick with the smell of coffee and sweat and the particular metallic tang of the subway itself. Sophia pressed into the crowd. Dante stayed close, close enough that she could feel his chest against her back when the bodies pushed them together, close enough that his breath was warm against the top of her head. A train arrived. They got on. Sophia found a spot near the back of the car, pressed against the doors and scanned the platform through the glass as the train pulled away. She saw him, a man, medium height, unremarkable, dark jacket, standing at the far end of the platform, watching the train leave. His eyes moved across the windows, one by one, searching. They landed on Sophia's car, held for a beat. Then the train was moving and he was gone. Rocco knew which train they had taken. He would have someone at the next station, and the next. Sophia turned to Dante. His face was very close. The car was crowded, bodies pressed on all sides. One end there was nowhere to look but at each other. His dark eyes were calm, steady, but she could see something working behind them. The same thing she had seen in the rooming house when Enzo's call had come. Recognition. The slow, cold understanding that this was not a game. "How many?" he asked, barely audible over the train noise. "At least 2 in the car, 1 on foot, maybe more." "Rocco's people?" "Yes." Dante was quiet for a moment. The train rocked beneath them, swaying through the tunnel. Bodies pressed in on all sides. Strangers, oblivious, scrolling phones, staring at the ceiling. Then Dante said, "I'm calling my father." Sophia's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Hard, harder than she meant to. Her fingers wrapped around the bones above his pulse point and held. "No," she said. He looked down at her hand, and then up at her face. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of it. She was gripping him with a strength that didn't match her size, and her eyes were locked on his with an intensity that she couldn't fully mask, no matter how hard she tried. "Sophia, if you call your father, Rocco knows within the hour. He has people inside the family. He has people everywhere. If Salvatore starts asking questions, Rocco will know we're running, and he will stop running and start hunting. Do you understand?" The words came out faster than she intended. Too fast. Too desperate. She heard it in her own voice. The crack beneath the calm, the fear she had been holding down since Enzo's phone call, breaking the surface. Dante looked at her hand on his wrist, at her face, at the way her jaw was set, her dark eyes burning with something that went beyond fear, something that looked like conviction. He didn't pull away. "Then what do we do?" he asked. Sophia released his wrist, stepped back, as far as the crowded car would allow, which was inches. She breathed. Let the calm settle back into place, layer by layer, the way she had been building it since she was 9 years old. We get off at the next stop, she said. We lose them, and then I tell you everything. Dante held her gaze for a long beat. She watched him process it, the urgency, the weight of it, the fact that she was asking him to trust her completely without giving him a single reason why. Then he nodded. Once. Okay, he said. The train slowed. Bergen Street, doors opened, bodies moved. Sophia and Dante moved with them, out onto the platform, into the crowd. Anonymous again. Sophia scanned the platform as they walked. No one watching. No dark jackets standing still in the flow of commuters. Clean. For now. They took the stairs 2 at a time and emerged onto Bergen Street, where the morning light was thin and cold, and the city moved around them with its usual indifference. Sophia turned east, away from Atlantic, away from the rooming house, away from everything Rocco's people had mapped and watched and waited near. They walked for 4 blocks in silence. Sophia led. Dante followed. The city hummed around them. Traffic, voices, the distant wail of a siren somewhere north. And the distance between them on the sidewalk was exactly 1 step. Close enough to speak. Far enough to move independently if they needed to. At a small deli on a quiet corner, Sophia stopped, looked up and down the street. Satisfied. She pushed through the door. A bell jingled above them, and found a booth in the back, near the kitchen, where the noise of frying and the smell of coffee and bacon masked conversation, and the sight lines from the street were blocked by a shelf of canned goods. They sat across from each other. A waitress appeared, young, bored, chewing gum, and Sophia ordered coffee for both of them without looking at the menu. The waitress left. The deli was half full. Construction workers, a couple of students, an old man reading a newspaper with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. No one paid them any attention. Dante sat with his hands flat on the table, open, visible, the way he always held them near her. But this time there was something else in the gesture, something tighter. He was waiting. Sophia wrapped her hands around the coffee when it arrived, let the heat ground her, looked at Dante across the table, at the scar, the dark eyes, the jaw set in that flat, unreadable line, and felt the weight of what she was about to do settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing, heavy, unavoidable. My name is not Sophia Rossi, she said. Dante didn't move, didn't blink. My name is Sophia Valente. She watched his face, watched the name land, watched his eyes, those warm brown eyes that had looked at her with something close to tenderness not 2 hours ago. Go very, very still. Valente, one of the 5 original Sicilian families, the one the Morettis had destroyed, years before Dante was old enough to remember, the one whose bloodline had been erased from Sicily, from New York, from every record that mattered, heir, the one that was supposed to be dead. Dante's hands flat on the table did not move, but something changed in them, a tightening, almost imperceptible, in the tendons along his knuckles. How long? He asked. His voice was very quiet. Sophia held his gaze, did not look away, did not flinch. 2 years, she said, since the first night I walked into Il Giglio. The deli noise filled the silence between them. The sizzle of the grill, the low murmur of other conversations, the bell above the door as someone came in from the cold. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a world that did not know what was happening in this booth, in this moment, between these 2 people. Dante looked at her for a long time, long enough that the coffee grew cold in their cups, and long enough that the old man with the newspaper folded it and left, and no one took his place. Then he said, "Tell me the rest." And Sophia did. Sophia told him everything. She told him about Sicily first, about the house on the hillside in Corleone, the olive trees, the woman's voice speaking the old dialect in the kitchen, about being 9 years old and not understanding why they had to leave in the middle of the night, why Enzo carried her out through a back door, with a bag over one shoulder and his hand clamped firmly over her mouth, about the boat, the cold water. The weeks that followed, moving through cities she didn't know, sleeping in rooms that smelled like dust and unfamiliar soap. She told him what the Moretti family had done to the Valentes, not the version that lived in official records, the sanitized story of a rival hit. A clean takedown, business as usual. The real version, the one Enzo had told her, piece by piece over years when she was old enough to understand, the systematic destruction of an entire bloodline, the murders, the disappearances, the way the Valente name had been erased from Sicily so completely that no one alive would have known it existed if not for the handful of survivors scattered across the world, hiding under other names, living other lives. Dante listened. He did not move. He did not interrupt. His hand stayed flat on the table the entire time, open, visible, but no longer loose. The tendons stood out along his knuckles like cables under tension. His jaw was set. His eyes were fixed on Sophia's face with an intensity that was almost painful to look at directly. Then she told him about Marco. She told him about the wine cellar, about the phone call she had recorded 6 months into her time at Il Giglio. Standing behind a rack of Barolo, her phone pressed against her thigh, the recording app running, her breath held so tightly in her chest she thought her ribs might crack. Rocco's voice, calm and businesslike, arranging the payment. The name of the outside contractor, the amount, the timeline. All of it captured in 4 minutes and 17 seconds of audio that would end Rocco's life as he knew it. She told him about the ledger, the wire transfers, the months of careful, patient work, stealing documents, photographing pages, returning them exactly as she had found them, building the case one thread at a time, the way a spider builds a web, slowly, silently, without anyone seeing. And she told him what it all meant, what it proved, who had given the order and why, and how deep the cover-up went. Marco Moretti had not died in a rival hit. Marco Moretti had been murdered by Rocco, the man who sat at his father's right hand, who attended every family dinner, who had shaken Marco's hand at his own wedding. Rocco had done it because Marco was going to expose Rocco's skimming operation to Don Salvatoreé, and Rocco had buried it so cleanly, so completely, that for 3 years no one in the Moretti family had ever questioned the official story. No one except Dante. When Sophia finished, the deli was quieter than it had been before. The construction workers had gone. The students had left. The old man's table was empty. A single waitress moved behind the counter, wiping it down with a rag, not looking their way. Dante had not moved. Sophia watched him. Watched the information settle into him the way water settles into soil, slowly, deeply, changing the composition of everything it touched. She watched his face move through things she could not fully name. Something that looked like grief came first. A brief, raw tightening around his eyes, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it if she hadn't been watching for it. Then something harder, something colder. His jaw set tighter. His eyes went flat and dark in a way she had not seen before. Not the warm brown she had memorized, but something else entirely. Something that reminded her for the first time that this man was a Moretti, that the blood in his veins had done terrible things, that he was capable of things she did not want to think about. Then he looked at her. The look lasted a long time, long enough for Sophia to feel every second of it. The weight of his gaze moving across her face, reading her the way he read everything, but differently now. Not cataloging, not measuring, searching, trying to find something in her expression that would tell him what she was, what she really was, underneath the shy waitress and the 2 years of watching and the kiss in the rooming house that morning that now felt like it had happened in another lifetime. Sophia held his gaze. She did not look away. She did not flinch. She let him see everything, the fear, the guilt, the thing underneath both of them that she had been trying not to name for weeks. The thing that had cracked open in that narrow bed in Brooklyn when his fingers had found hers in the dark. "You have proof," Dante said. His voice was very quiet, so stripped of everything except the words themselves. "Right now, you have proof that Rocco killed my brother." "Yes, and you have had it for months." "Yes." A beat. The radiator in the corner of the deli clanked, once, like something shifting in its sleep. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked. "From the beginning. Why didn't you just—" "Because you would not have believed me." Sophia's voice was steady. She had rehearsed this answer in her head 100 times. In the dark, in the quiet, in the spaces between sleep and waking. But saying it out loud to his face with the full weight of what she had just told him, pressing down on both of them, it sounded different than she had imagined. Smaller, less certain. "I am a Valente. Your family destroyed mine. If I had walked up to you on the street and said, 'Your consigliere murdered your brother and I have proof,' what would you have done?" Dante opened his mouth, closed it, looked away, down at the table, at his hands, at the coffee that had gone cold hours ago. He knew the answer. They both knew it. "And the dialect," he said, "at Il Giglio. That was me, all of it, from the beginning." He nodded, slowly, processing. She watched him do it, watched him rebuild the last 2 years in his mind, reframing every interaction, every moment, every time he had seen her move through the restaurant like a ghost. Every time he had watched her and felt something he couldn't name. "Was any of it real?" he asked. The question hung between them like smoke. Quiet. Heavy. Went the kind of question that could not be answered with strategy or calculation or any of the tools Sophia had spent her entire life building to survive. She looked at him. At the man across the table from her, bruised by what she had just told him, raw with grief he had not yet fully felt, holding himself together with a discipline that she recognized because it was the same discipline she used every single day. "The last 3 weeks," she said, "all of it was real." Dante held her gaze. She watched him decide whether to believe her, watched the war move behind his eyes. The part of him that was a Moretti, trained to trust no one, against the part of him that had sat beside her on a narrow bed and held her hand in the dark without asking for anything in return. Then something shifted, something small and decisive, like a lock turning. 'Cause he believed her. She could see it, not in a smile, not in a softening of his expression, in something quieter than that, in the way his hands, flat on the table, finally unclenched, in the way his shoulders dropped, just slightly, releasing a tension he had been holding since the moment she said the word Valente. "Okay," he said. Just that. One word. But it carried everything. The grief, the fury at Rocco, the decision to set aside every reason he had ever been given to distrust her and choose instead to stand beside her. Sophia exhaled. She hadn't realized she had been holding her breath. Then Dante's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His expression changed, not softening exactly, but shifting. Something practical moved behind his eyes. "Enzo," he said. He turned the phone so Sophia could see the screen. A text from an unsaved number. 3 words. "Call me. Now." Sophia reached across the table and took the phone from his hand. Their fingers brushed, a brief electric contact that neither of them acknowledged. She dialed the number, put it on speaker, held low between them, the volume barely audible over the deli noise. Enzo answered on the second ring. "Sophia, is Dante with you?" "Yes. We're together. We're safe. For now." A pause. She heard him breathe, heard the weight in it, the same weight she had heard in his voice on the phone that morning, the fear he was trying not to let show. "Rocco knows everything," Enzo said. "Not just the recording, all of it. The ledger, the transfers. He knows you have enough to bury him." Another pause, heavier this time. "Or he has gone to Salvatore." The words landed like stones dropping into still water. Sophia and Dante looked at each other across the table. "What does that mean?" Dante asked. Leaning in now, his voice low and urgent. "What does Rocco going to my father—" "It means he is framing Sophia," Enzo said. "He is telling Salvatore that she is the threat, that she is a Valente operative, working to destroy the family. He is telling him that the evidence she has is fabricated, and he is asking your father to deal with it." The deli hummed around them. The waitress dropped a glass somewhere behind the counter. A car horn honked on the street outside. "We need to move before Salvatore acts," Enzo said. "Tonight, we go public. The journalist, she is ready. I have been in contact with her for weeks. If we send her everything now, it prints by morning. Once it is out, Rocco has nothing. No leverage, no cover, and your father will have no choice but to see what Rocco actually is. Sophia looked at Dante. At his face, set, hard, the grief and the fury fused into something sharp and purposeful. At his hands, finally open again on the table. At the scar on his jaw, catching the thin light from the deli window. Do it, Dante said. Not to Sophia, to Enzo, to both of them. End it. Sophia held the phone between them and looked at the man across the table and felt the weight of what came next settle onto her shoulders. Heavier than anything she had carried before. Heavier than 2 years of hiding. Heavier than the evidence, the recordings, the years of silence. Tonight everything would burn, and tomorrow whatever was left would have to be rebuilt from the ground up. Where she pressed send on the email she had drafted 3 days ago, the one she had never been able to make herself send until now. The evidence, all of it, attached, gone, the moment she hit the button, into the hands of someone she couldn't control, moving toward a truth that couldn't be taken back. The phone confirmed it. Sent. Sophia set it down on the table, looked at Dante. He looked back at her, and in his eyes, those warm brown eyes that had looked at her with something close to tenderness just hours before, she saw something new. Not tenderness, not suspicion, something harder and more honest than both. Partnership. Now we wait, she said. Dante nodded and reached across the table slowly, deliberately, and took her hand. The story hit the Times at 6:14 a.m. the next morning. Sophia knew the exact time because she was awake when it happened. She had not slept. Not really. She and Dante had left the deli the previous afternoon and moved through Brooklyn like ghosts, changing locations every 2 hours the way Enzo had taught her years ago. A laundromat on Smith Street, a movie theater on Court Street where they sat in the back row and watched nothing, just let the darkness and the noise cover them. A bar on Atlantic where Dante knew the owner, and they sat in a back booth and drank nothing and waited for the hours to pass. At midnight, Enzo called again. His voice was calmer this time, steadier, the fear from that morning replaced by something more like resolve. He told them where to go, a hotel in Manhattan, small, old, the kind of place that didn't ask for real names or real credit cards. When he had already booked the room, he would meet them there in the morning. They took the subway back into Manhattan in silence. The train was nearly empty at that hour. Late-night stragglers, a woman asleep against the window, a teenager with headphones staring at his phone. Sophia and Dante sat side by side, shoulders touching, and did not speak. There was nothing left to say. Everything had been said. In the deli, over the phone, with Enzo, in the hours of waiting that followed. The words were done. What remained was waiting. The hotel room was small and clean and smelled like lemon soap. A single bed, a window that looked out onto a narrow street where the streetlights cast everything in amber. Sophia set her bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window and did not move for a long time. Dante sat beside her, got close, the way he always sat beside her now, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like there had never been a time when they were strangers. At some point she leaned into him, not dramatically, just a slow, quiet collapse of the distance between them, her head coming to rest against his shoulder the way it had on the train in Brooklyn. Days ago, a lifetime ago. Dante's arm moved around her, settled across her back. His hand rested against her hip, warm, steady, holding her there without pressure. They stayed like that as the hours passed. The city moved outside the window. The streetlights burned. At some point, Sophia's eyes closed, and this time she slept. Deeply, dreamlessly, for the first time in weeks. When she woke, gray morning light was coming through the window, and Dante was sitting exactly where she had left him. His arms still around her, his eyes open, watching the street below. "What time is it?" she asked. 6:15. She sat up, reached for her phone, opened the browser, typed the name of the journalist. The one Enzo had been in contact with for months, the one who had received the evidence package the night before. The article was there, at the top of the page. The headline was precise and brutal and left nothing to interpretation. Sophia read it. Then she handed the phone to Dante. He read it too. She watched his face as he did. watched his eyes move across the words, watched the information settle into him. The evidence, the ledger, the wire transfers, the audio recording, transcribed in full. Rocco's name, attached to all of it, irrefutable and permanent. And at the bottom of the article, there a statement from an anonymous source inside the Moretti family. Someone Enzo had cultivated over years, someone whose testimony corroborated everything Sophia had collected. Dante set the phone down on the bed between them, looked at the window. His jaw worked slowly, the way it did when he was processing something too large to hold all at once. "It's done," he said. Sophia nodded. The words sat in the quiet room like something solid, something real. 2 years of silence, 2 years of watching, 2 years of hiding in plain sight, reduced to 2 words. It's done. She waited for the relief to come, expected it to wash over her the way it did in the movies. A wave, a rush, a sudden lightness. It didn't. What came instead was something quieter, something that felt less like an ending and more like the moment after a storm passes, when the air is still and the ground is wet and everything is different, but nothing has yet decided what it is going to become. Enzo arrived at 9 a.m. He came through the door with his hands in his jacket pockets and his beard catching the light and his right leg dragging just slightly on the carpet. Worse than usual, Sophia noticed. He had been moving fast, she guessed. Running, maybe, for the first time in years. His face was tired, but his eyes were bright. Brighter than she had seen them in months. The warm brown eyes that had watched over her since she was 9 years old. He looked at Sophia first, then at Dante, then back at Sophia. "Rocco was arrested at 7:45 this morning," he said. "Not by the police, by Salvatoreé's men. Before the FB, I even knew what was happening." Sophia let that settle. Salvatore had moved fast. Faster than anyone had expected. Faster, maybe, than even Rocco had expected. The old Don had read the article, seen the evidence, and acted within 90 minutes. No hesitation, no investigation. No benefit of the doubt for the man who had sat at his right hand for a decade. Rocco had been dealt with the way the Morettis dealt with everything that threatened them. Quietly, completely, and before the rest of the world could get involved. "And Enzo?" Dante asked. "You? Are you safe?" Enzo looked at him. Looked at this young man, the son of the Don who had destroyed Sophia's family, sitting on a hotel bed beside Sophia with his hand resting on hers. And something moved across his weathered face. Not warmth exactly. Something more complicated than that. Something that looked like assessment. "I am safe," Enzo said. "Your father called me directly, an hour ago." A pause. "He wanted to thank me." The room went very quiet. Sophia looked at Enzo, at the man who had spent 20 years keeping her hidden from the Moretti family and who had just received a phone call from the head of that family thanking him for helping to destroy one of his own. The world was not what it had been yesterday. It was not what it had been 2 years ago, when Sophia had walked into Elio for the first time with a plan and a grudge and nothing else. It was something new, something unfinished, something that would take time to understand. Enzo stayed for an hour. They talked, quietly, carefully, the way people talk when they are still not sure the danger is truly past. He told them what he knew, that Salvatore wanted to meet Sophia, not as an enemy, not as a threat, as something else, something the old Don had not yet fully decided how to define, but something he was willing to explore. Then Enzo left. He hugged Sophia at the door, a long, tight embrace, his thick, scarred hands pressing against her back, his chin resting on the top of her head. He said nothing. He didn't need to. She felt everything in the way he held her, the relief, the pride, the particular grief of a man who had spent his entire life protecting something and was only now beginning to understand that the thing he had protected had grown strong enough to protect itself. He nodded at Dante on his way out. Dante nodded back. The door closed. They stayed in the hotel room for the rest of the morning, not talking, not doing anything really, just existing in the same space, in the quiet, or in the strange and unfamiliar feeling of having nothing left to hide. Sophia sat on the bed with her legs crossed beneath her, looking at the window. Dante sat beside her, close, one hand resting on the mattress between them. Open as always, near her, but not demanding anything. At some point, Sophia turned to look at him, at the scar on his jaw, at the dark hair falling across his forehead, at the way the morning light caught his face and turned his eyes from black to brown. Warm, soft, the softest thing about him. "What happens now?" she asked. Dante turned his head, looked at her. The expression on his face was the same one she had seen in the deli. Not tenderness exactly. Something harder and more honest. Something that acknowledged everything between them without flinching from any of it. "I don't know," he said, and then, quieter, "But I'm not going anywhere." Sophia looked at him for a long time. Then she reached out and took his hand, the same way she had done in the rooming house, in the dark, when everything had first cracked open between them. Fingers curling around his, small hand against large, olive skin against pale. Dante squeezed. Once, firm and certain. That evening, Sophia went back to Il Giglio. Not to work, not to hide. She walked through the front door, not the service entrance, not the back alley, not any of the invisible routes she had used for 2 years. The front door, into the warm amber light and the murmur of conversation and the smell of good wine and expensive food. The room did not freeze this time. No one noticed her walk in. Not at first. She was still small, still quiet. Still the kind of woman people look past without thinking about it. But something had changed. Something in the way she moved. Not the deliberate invisibility she had practiced for years, but something else. Something that held its ground. Something that took up space. She walked through the dining room, past the tables, past the bar, past the sommelier, who glanced up and then looked away. She walked toward the back of the restaurant, toward the corridor near the kitchen. The same corridor where she had disappeared after every shift for 2 years. The same narrow hallway with the fluorescent light in the cold concrete walls and the sound of the kitchen bleeding through the door. She stopped there, stood in the middle of it, looked at the space that had been her hiding place, her refuge, her cover for so long. It looked smaller than she remembered. Footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around. She already knew who it was. Knew the sound of his footsteps the way she knew the sound of her own heartbeat. Steady, unhurried, present. Dante stopped beside her, looked down the corridor the way she had looked down it 1,000 times before, at the flickering light, the worn carpet, the door to the kitchen at the far end. "This is where you hid," he said, "every night, for 2 years." He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to face her, looked at her the way he had looked at her on the mezzanine, the night the room froze, like she was the most important thing he had ever found. Like he was seeing her for the first time, and it was almost too much. "You were never invisible," he said. "I saw you the first week." Sophia looked up at him, at the man who had spent 2 years watching her without her knowing, at the man whose brother she had avenged, at the man she had kissed in a rooming house in Brooklyn and lied to and told the truth to and held in the dark, at the man she was not done with, not even close. Dante leaned down, kissed her, slow, quiet, unhurried. The way you kiss someone when you are not afraid of what comes next. His hand found the side of her face, the way it always did. Warm, steady, holding her there like she was something worth being careful with. When he pulled back, Sophia was smiling, the first real smile she had given in longer than she could remember. It felt strange on her face, unfamiliar, like a muscle she had forgotten how to use. "So what now?" Dante asked. Sophia looked at him, at the corridor behind her, at the restaurant beyond it, the noise, the light, the world she had spent 2 years moving through like a ghost. She thought about Salvatoreé wanting to meet her, about the Moretti family, fractured and reforming, deciding what it was going to become now that Rocco was gone, about the 5 families and the old feuds and the blood that connected all of them, hers included, about the fact that tonight, for the first time in 19 years, her real name existed in the open, Sophia Valente, known, seen, no longer hiding. She thought about Enzo and the way he had held her at the door, about the man beside her and the way his hand was still warm against her face, about all the things that were finished and all the things that were only just beginning. Now, she said, I stopped hiding. The corridor was quiet around them. The kitchen hummed beyond the door. Somewhere in the restaurant, a glass clinked against another glass, and the sound carried through the warm air, like a promise. Dante took her hand, held it the way he had held it in Brooklyn, firm, certain, like something he had no intention of letting go. They walked out of the corridor together, into the light, into whatever came next. And the story, the real one, the one that was only now beginning, followed them out.